This week on the podcast, we're hosting a short series of Talking HealthTech episodes in partnership with the Digital Health CRC, where I'm speaking to the digital health leaders of tomorrow who are expressing their ideas, solutions and opinions from a basis of evidence. If you don't know, the Digital Health CRC invests in research and development to support the growth of a strong digital health industry, improve patient outcomes and experience, and deliver sustainable digital health solutions. The Digital Health CRC do a great job in education and capacity building in the sector as well, to support the next generation of emerging digital health leaders and deliver new and innovative learning opportunities for the sector. If you want to learn more about each of the people who appear in this episode, jump onto the Talent Hub section of the Digital Health CRC website. Each speaker that you hear in a second on this episode will share a short description of the work they're doing and why, followed by a brief conversation with me so we can learn more about the problem that they're solving. This is part 2 of the conversations I had with the emerging leaders, so make sure you jump back and check out the previous episode for all the other discussions that we've had in this mini-series, plus also subscribe to our audio podcast, because there's an additional bonus episode that we've included on this topic as well. Here we go. Collaboration starts with a conversation, Team HealthTech. Let's make it happen. This is Talking HealthTech with me, Peter Birch, featuring content and community about technology in healthcare.
Hi, I'm Harvey. Today I'm going to talk about how we can improve the quality of healthcare by using data collected every day in hospitals. From the moment you walk into the hospital and register your details, your data is constantly being collected by hospitals for administrative purposes. Now, there are a large amount of administrative data collecting dust in a hard drive somewhere, not being used. So, what if we can use the data in such a way that is useful for healthcare practitioners to improve their practice? Now, clinicians use data for feedback all the time in hospitals. One of the major issues in healthcare quality monitoring is that patients can come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, meaning that there is a large variance of patients that come through each day. And because the measurements we generally use are outcome indicators, this means that generally, sicker patients have worse outcomes. Now, we don't want clinicians to be unfairly measured based on the patients that they treat. For example, if a doctor only treats healthy patients, their outcomes are going to be way better than a doctor that treats sicker patients. So the question becomes, how do we isolate variances solely due to clinical practice and not due to patient variances? So, my objective is to generate an algorithm that allows for standardized outcome measures so that clinicians can reflect and improve on their practice. Each patient becomes a valuable data point in guiding clinician practice, and outcomes are standardized for clinicians to have an apples-to-apples comparison. More importantly, it is my hope that my research not only shows that outcome measures to clinicians, but to develop transparent algorithms that allow the clinicians to reflect on how and why patients have worse or better outcomes. Though it has been a long 3-year journey in getting here, my preliminary results show significant progress in the way that we can use data that otherwise would be forgotten.
My name's Harvey. I'm a third-year PhD student at Monash University. I'm supervised by 3 supervisors. I'm Stella from the public health side. I got Dragon from the IT side, and I have an industry partner with David Rankin, who is a hospital director of informatics at Cabrini. Yeah.
Nice one. And tell me about the research you're doing.
Yeah, my research focuses on using administrative data or admissions data to standardize outcome indicators or KPIs that are mostly used by clinicians nowadays to reflect on their current practice.
So you mentioned a few things there. There's administrative data, yes, and there's outcome measures. Tell me, for those that don't know, tell me more about outcome measures, what that means.
Right. Outcome measures generally means that, so what outcome measures are is that clinicians tend to use outcome measures as a measure of how well their patients are doing. Outcome measures are such as, how long a patient has been in hospital, whether or not they had an emergency readmission or an unintended readmission, or whether or not they had hospital-acquired complications. Generally, those are the things that you don't want, such as, one could be infections in hospital.
Stuff that you could hopefully avoid.
Yeah, stuff that you could avoid.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So I imagine then, those outcome measures, there's a lot of variables or things that would depend on the outcome, whether it's where the clinician's working, the demographics of the patients, right? Am I kind of on the right track here?
Yes, that's exactly what my research focuses on.
That was like...
Yeah, it's so one of the things when you look at outcome measures is that there are so many things that can influence patient outcome. We have clinicians who have their own practice and their own methods of practicing. Yeah. That's one of them. The patient that you're treating could have a myriad of different diagnoses and diseases and the procedures that they go through. So my job then is to solely isolate what exactly can be attributed to the clinician by studying how do we group patients together in different risk factors.
What does that mean? Group them in different risk factors?
What that means is that I'm seeking to find, through the use of a large data set, ways that we can differentiate patients into maybe low, medium, or high-risk patients. So then, like, when doctors look at their, let's say, their indicator, their outcome, their KPIs, you can look at, these patients should have they should be belong in the hospital for like 3 days. And okay, all my patients are, within that range of 3 days, 3 to 4 days. They shouldn't be way too far ahead they shouldn't be too long in the hospital. Yeah. I do that by a method known as risk adjustment. And that's the interesting part is I get to look at all these different patient data sets that come in and then like figure out what exactly is going on with the procedures and the diagnosis. So what type of procedures they go through, what are they diagnosed with, and how these things attribute to the outcomes of the patient. So by isolating the diagnosis and the procedures, you then have and figuring out if a model patient comes in, like so majority of the patients with this diagnosis and this procedure should fall under the range of 2 to 3 days length of stay. But what happens if I have a doctor that suddenly has a 10-day they stay in the hospital for 10 days rather than 2 to 3, which is the expected outcome. Then the feedback can be fed back to the clinician, allowing them to maybe think about what can they improve in the future and stuff like that.
And this is the thing. It's kind of like, I would imagine that data then, it's the starting point of a conversation, whether it's, might not necessarily be the clinician needs to do something better, but something is obviously outlying. What I find is interesting, though, is it sounds like this is, wouldn't it be handy but it also would not be handy if everyone was using the exact same system and filling out the exact same fields, and then we've all got the same information that we can rely on, but we don't have that. And that's probably a good thing, but we could and this is what we talk about, interoperability and everything being thing. But if there's this minimum level that everyone's capturing this data already, it sounds like then maybe if we can do something with what we've already got, we're getting it's almost like we're extracting more value from stuff that's already there.
Yep. One of the things that, because we in Australia, our hospitals are also, our healthcare systems are differentiated in private and public, and they all operate under different systems, different EMRs, electronic medical records and stuff like that. Luckily for me, most hospitals have to collect a very specific minimum data set that they have to deliver to to regulatory bodies, I'm pretty sure. That means that if I could use this data set, it could be used to plug and play into almost any hospital in Australia. That's the beauty of using this. The challenges in using this is that because it is administrative data and is used for administrative purposes, the data may not be always, it's highly variable. And that's the challenge in using data like this. Yeah.
And then I think about then the potential for this. What would you hope then, after everything is said and done, what would be like the best use case for the work that you're doing?
The idea here is the best use case would be, let's say my model is accurate in producing, in giving good feedback to clinicians. All the outcome indicators would be explained. So all the patient attributed factors to the outcome would be explainable. So then the missing part would be up to the clinicians to have to think about, right? Yes. So by explaining most of it or majority of why the patient has this outcome, you then leave the practice side to the clinician and say that, okay, like this is why the patient has this outcome. It's expected that his outcome is within this range, within, say, that like back to the example before, a patient with who has kidney stones and went through some a procedure, a collection of procedures, should have a length of stay of maybe 2 days, but somehow the patient's been here for 4 days. Is there a reason why? And when the clinician can reflect on that and think, maybe, and it's not necessarily pointing fingers or anything like that. It's simply to ask the clinician to reflect on their practices and think about, like, is there anything special about this patient or is there something that you can do better next time?
Well, this is the thing. What gets measured gets managed, and everything's a collaborative approach. And I think I heard you say as well. It's giving an apples to apples comparison for this kind of stuff that we do.
Yes, it is giving an apples to apples comparison, because one of the main things is if you don't adjust it properly, one of the things that do happen is that doctors who generally treat, if let's say all the patients that they treat are healthy patients, their outcomes are going to be way better than a doctor who just treats riskier patients, at-risk patients or older patients. Then how do you compare these two doctors, or how do they compare to their peers? You would actually need to standardize them into some sort of form so that they could compare their results side by side.
Have you ever been unwell and needed to see a doctor? Well, you'll probably recall how frustrating it can be to book an appointment, with wait times sometimes stretching into months. Now think, you're patiently waiting for your appointment, but a person in front doesn't show up for theirs and doesn't cancel in advance. This is a missed appointment. Missed appointments waste patient time, staff time, and healthcare resources. So what can we do about it? Through collaborations with healthcare providers, my research looks to identify the root causes of missed appointments. Armed with those insights, we're exploring how we can harness the potential of digital solutions and develop tailored interventions that address those barriers head-on. The vision? A future where we have better appointment attendance, health service communication, and access to healthcare for when patients need it most.
Hi, Peter. I'm Shayma, and I'm a PhD student based at the Australian Centre for Health Services Innovation that sits within Queensland University of Technology. And my research, I guess if I was to frame it in one sentence, it would be around being able to explore patient non-attendance and how we can harness the potential of digital solutions to reduce its impact on the health service and potentially also improve access to healthcare for patients.
Cool. And so when we say non-attendance, because patients need to attend appointments to receive healthcare, so it's patients not showing up for appointments, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Essentially, the way we've been defining it in terms of the scope for the project, it's around the idea of patients who don't show up, essentially just not coming in to see their doctor or their specialist, or in other cases, people who cancel a little too late, so maybe 20 minutes before the appointment or within 24 hours, where there's potentially a missed opportunity for other people to take up that vacant appointment slot.
Yeah. Well, I guess when you first said that, what the impact is of that, I guess my mind goes to a few places. From a clinician's perspective, it could be the financial implication of having an empty spot from a clinician that would otherwise be, I assume, booked out months in advance. But there's probably other implications for other stakeholders too. Is this what you're exploring in your research?
Yes. So we are looking at it from the perspective of implications to healthcare providers, but also for our patients who are waiting for appointments. So as you already said, like for healthcare providers, one of the biggest things is having workflow disruptions. So if a clinician's waiting for a patient and they don't show up, there's a bit of that wasted time that clinicians will have to reallocate some of that time to do other activities. And also potentially the additional administrative burden to be able to then get another patient in that slot. In terms of other stakeholders for patients, usually non-attendance contributes to lengthened waiting lists. So for most of us, we've probably experienced how long it takes from the point of trying to book an appointment, whether that's with a GP or with a specialist. It usually takes at least a month, especially with a specialist, to be able to see them. And if patient non-attendance usually disrupts that, and it often leads to lengthened waiting list, it also is potentially detrimental to some patients depending on what they're seeking healthcare for. So being able to access healthcare a bit more efficiently and more sooner is often more beneficial for patients.
Got it. So there's a fair bit of the why there, and the unpacking a little bit more about what you could be achieving. It's a very big deep dive into a topic, like in terms of focusing your research around this. Like, what types of activities are you doing, or how are you kind of breaking this concept down?
I guess when we started, we weren't too sure what we were trying to do because patient non-attendance is not a new issue. It's existed in healthcare. So when I started, I think I was very optimistic, maybe a bit too optimistic of like, maybe we could get it to a point where we could eradicate it. So it's like 0%, everyone shows up. But in reality, that's probably not achievable or feasible or viable. So we've moved away from that idea and trying to see if we can at least reduce the numbers. So say if there is 1 in every 10 patients or like 50% of patients don't show up, if we can get that down to maybe even 5%. So at least try and get more patients in the door or have people canceling in advance so that there's more people that can take up that slot. That's kind of where we're at. In terms of how we're approaching that, so our project is in collaboration with Metro South Health. And we're starting off with a few different clinics within Metro South Health to try and see which clinics have a high number of non-attendance, and potentially from that start off with, one, understand why patients might not be showing up at that clinic and get the perspective of both staff and patients in regards to why that is. And then from that, try to understand perspective of both staff and patients in regards to what solutions might work. Because something that we know in research is what staff might say is an effective solution might not actually translate to what patients want.
Yeah.
And so the goal is potentially to get a balance between the two perspectives and get a better understanding of, we have this problem, what is causing this problem, what can we do to make this problem, reduce the impact of this problem, and what are the potential solutions that people are telling us that could be effective.
Yeah.
And then try and see and propose and use that information and kind of propose that to the health service of being like, well, this is what people are telling us that they want potentially. Are any of these options a viable solution, or can we test some of these things out to see?
If you just took the perspective of one stakeholder, for example, from the clinician side or from the admin side, it's kind of like, well, you know, and I'm not saying they're saying this, but it's like, well, if only the patients understood how much of an impact it had, because then, you know, they don't show up, then the doctor's just going to be sitting there. But then from a patient side, they're kind of like, well, sure, but, you know, I got kids and the school changed the thing, and that, like, everyone's got their own kind of sphere of stuff going on. So, yeah, it's a complicated one that, has there got to a point where, because I can't even think of, like, what would be implemented to try and, like, because life happens, you know what I mean? Like, is there actually some viable solutions here that are starting to show light, or is it still too early to see?
So when we look at some of the evidence out there, we know that there are a couple solutions that people have tried in other settings. We know that there is telehealth. A number of us are probably more familiar with it following the pandemic, where maybe a lot of our face-to-face appointments have transitioned to maybe telehealth. But there are also potential other ways of changing the way reminders are received to have a little bit more interactivity. So a lot of us probably experience the posted appointment reminder that comes in that can sometimes, for a number of us, we probably don't see that. So it's trying to see, is there a better way? So one of the things we're looking at is there a better way for reminders to be received by patients, or is there a better way of communicating appointment information to patients? Some of the other solutions that we know exist is better booking process, and a couple of those process changes or procedures in how we inform patients about appointments, how do we engage with with patients, or like how healthcare providers engage with their patients. So a couple of those type of solutions. So not all of them are completely digital, but some of them have tidbits where there's implementation of a digital aspect to it to make it a hopefully more efficient, effective process.
Yeah. And then lastly, thinking about then the future here, say we you know, the research is done and some of these initiatives are implemented, what do you hope the outcomes will produce in the particular setting that you're talking about, and potentially more broadly across the healthcare system?
Probably, I would say the vision more generally is a couple of different things. If I had to summarize it in like 3 things, it would be hopefully better appointment attendance, and second is better communication between healthcare providers and patients, and the third, being able to give patients the appointments they need when they need it most. But yeah, so like those are probably the 3 main things we're hoping. It seems pretty broad at the moment, but I guess, yeah, my project is a very small bit of trying to trying to solve quite a big issue, but the hope is if we can take maybe one step at a time towards improving healthcare, this is where my project hopefully sits.
Yeah, that's the way.
Hi, I'm Nalika Ulapane. I'm a researcher with the Swinburne University of Technology. I work on designing ways to make use of technology and data to improve the quality of healthcare. For instance, I do things like making it possible for doctors and nurses to use their smartphone in the hospital to make better clinical decisions. The Clots app is one great example for such a system. That is a smartphone-based clinical decision support system I have co-designed for a leading cancer hospital in Australia. A case study with that system showed that it helped in 79% relative risk reduction in certain complications in certain kinds of surgeries. That is a great indicator for how much of an impact digital health solutions can make. So I'm very excited to be contributing to this field as a technology and a process designer. My aim is to help design the best quality healthcare system in the future that would contribute to a healthy and a happy population.
So, I'm Nalika. I'm a researcher with the Swinburne University of Technology. So I come from an engineering background, so I've been working in electrical and electronics engineering. Then I moved into electromagnetic sensors. That was my first exposure into a research career. And then I moved into robotics. I've done a bit of machine learning. And then I've gone into another domain called control engineering. And after that, I've touched a sphere called digital health, which is what I'm working on. So currently, I'm fairly engaged in digital health. I'm working on multiple projects in digital health. For example, I work on clinical decision support systems, introducing digital health components into clinical decision support systems. I also work on the concept called digital twin. That is something that comes from the manufacturing industry. So I'm working towards introducing that concept to the healthcare sector as well. I also work on other aspects such as web-based solutions, mobile applications, and stuff. So I've touched things like helping out dementia family carers through a web-based solution. And also in terms of clinical decision support systems and mobile apps, I have worked on something called Clots app. So that's kind of like a smartphone-based clinical decision support system. So that would be a very interesting topic to talk about today.
Yeah, look, a wide breadth of experience across industries and now into digital health. And the Clots app you mentioned there, is that the area that you're doing your research in now?
Yes, so that is the main component of my current research involvement. So what we're doing there is we partnered with a leading cancer hospital in Australia. So the idea of that clinical decision support system comes from a leading clinician in our cancer hospital. So it came as a smartphone app. So she basically is a very senior clinician. And about 10 years ago, I think it started in like 2013. She's a senior clinician and she works with a lot of students. So she basically had the issue of junior clinicians hassling her a lot, giving her phone calls, talking to her, asking questions, a lot of the stuff related to clinical practice. So she's an expert in the field. So she had the idea of why not I develop a smartphone app, including all this clinical knowledge, so that it'll be helpful to everybody else and she would have more of her time. So she wouldn't have to answer the phone calls and she'd have basically more time and freedom, and she can use that time for all sort of other things. So that's how it was developed way back in 2013. So she is a doctor, and what the weakness of her was she is not into technology. She didn't know how to develop a mobile app. So she got engaged with a smartphone app developer. So that's where the version 1 of this app came in. So they've developed that, and it has been used up to about, I think, 2018. And they've done kind of like a very nice observational study. And they've seen quite a good improvement of patient outcomes as well surrounding all the clinical activities that are involved with this smartphone-based clinical decision support system. And that's where Digital Health CRC and I got involved in it, because she wanted to take it a step further. She wanted to kind of get some formality into this smartphone app to get it assessed get it validated, probably get it TGA approved if possible. And her bigger picture was getting commercialized. So that's where I came in. And I'm with the Swinburne University. So we have a whole research team led by Professor Nilmini Wickramasinghe. So she's a very senior clinician, not a clinician, she's a professor. So she's an expert in digital health, but not a medical doctor. So she's leading our team. So that's how we came into it, to take that smartphone app, validate it further, and taking it towards the commercialization. So that's where my research contribution comes into play.
That's such an interesting area. Like that's such an important area of, yes, you've got this idea and something that's demonstrating some good product market fit, but adding that muscle behind it and the credible validation piece is something that a lot of technology solutions struggle with. Tell me a little bit more about what that validation process looks like.
Yeah, so it came to us as an already developed smartphone app. So what we saw was like, okay, so we have the smartphone app. So the first question we asked was, where's the clinical knowledge? Where is this coming from? So that information was missing. So basically, the knowledge came from a very senior clinician. So that was her knowledge base. But we needed some formality. What we really saw as the opportunity was to get that formality behind this app and then develop it as a product that could go towards TGA approval, because that in Australia gives you more formality towards a solution like this, and then look at market opportunities going beyond that. Why not, if we can make it a gold standard in Australia or even worldwide, that would be great. So that's kind of our ambition. So what we wanted to do was, starting from that smartphone app, getting the formality behind it and take it towards that validation stage or getting it approved. So the way we started it was we asked for that clinical knowledge. So basically, she gave us a bunch of papers. She told, okay, this is where this knowledge is published. So it's all like established, peer-reviewed clinical knowledge. So we collected that knowledge base. And then what we did was, so we have a smartphone app and we have a clinical knowledge base. So there's a big gap between there. Because you can't give a bunch of papers to a smartphone app developer to write a code on. So what we did was, like, I'm an engineer. So I saw this nice little synergy between clinical knowledge and software development. We use algorithms and flowcharts, data structures, and all that. So I took that data structure algorithm background and I kind of converted all this clinical knowledge into a bunch of flowcharts. So then if you look at a flowchart, then that's much more kind of convenient to a software developer to write a code on.
They know that language, yeah.
Yeah. So we did that translation from a bunch of papers into a bunch of flowcharts. So that was our second step, this translation. And then what we did was, like, the app as we had was just a standalone tool. Like that, there was no data backend. It wasn't collecting any data, and it wasn't connected to any database. So it was all coded in the app. So what we did was, we saw the opportunity of synergizing data. We started coding a backend for this app. So that means we wanted the clinical guidelines or the recommendations given by this clinical decision support system to sit in a database and not in the app. And we also wanted to track the usage of the clinicians, like what time of day they're logging in and what decision pathways they're taking. So we wanted to collect that information. Not that it really makes sense at this stage, but we saw that opportunity because data is really valuable at this stage, and that's the future, basically. Yeah. So we saw that opportunity, so we started coding a back end for this standalone app. So that was a big improvement from version 1 to coming into version 2. So after that, we developed the new version of the app with the data backend. And now we are at the stage of pitching it towards TGA approval. So we have the vision that it might be TGA exempt, because this is kind of, there are different ways TGA kind of classifies different devices. We hope this might be an exempt device, but we have to go through that assessment process to actually validate that decision. Because if it's exempt, then it makes it much easier and less stringent for commercialization. So that's what we're hoping for, but we have to go through that process. So we're currently at that stage of validating that and checking it against the TGA guidelines on what kind of a device this is. Is it just a decision guiding tool, or is it a formal decision support system? Does it fall under a medical device, which I don't think it does? That's where we're at currently. So the future is go through the validation process and then get it commercialized at a later stage. So it's like a long process. Yeah. We've added that structured and sequential nature to this to get that formality in this CDSS, Clinical Decision Support System.
It's interesting, isn't it, when you've got all of this stuff to do even before you get to that stage of selling the thing. But that's important, and getting that foundation right at something that can often be overlooked. I guess then that's the exciting future about this, right? What are you most excited about in terms of once we get through this validation and commercialization, get it out there into the hands of clinicians and dealing with patients? What's the future here?
One of the most important things is they've done an observational study from 2013 to 2018, basically the initial phase of it. So I was impressed about the results they've seen. So they've done an observational study where some clinicians use this smartphone app or the clinical decision support system versus some others who don't use it. So they've seen great improvement in clinical outcomes of patients among the group of clinicians who have been using this smartphone app. So that's a really interesting observation to see. It wasn't a new drug. It wasn't a new treatment. Yeah. It was just having a smartphone in your hand so that the clinicians would have the possibility to look into and kind of verify the things they try to do. So kind of having that guidance or support for decision making has had immense benefits to patients. So that's very encouraging to see. Yeah. So I think that's the best thing about digital health, because it's not all about kind of new treatments, new drugs, pharmaceuticals, or anything like that. Clever use of technology, data, and internet and other things. If you kind of do a small thing, if you change a small thing in clinical workflows, that might have immense improvements in health outcomes. It could work the other way as well if you make the wrong decision to change your clinical workflow to give you wrong outcomes. But you can do it certainly better. I mean, you can kind of introduce new technologies, make little tweaks to the clinical workflows, introduce little technologies, and it is really impressive to see these positive outcomes, the patient outcomes improving. So I think in future, in Australia, the healthcare sector is fairly advanced. I think we're at a phase we're heading towards the concept called smart hospital. That means Internet of Things enabled in the hospital. The data about patients will be tracked much more rigorously. Obviously, there will be privacy concerns because hospitals are obviously targets of cyber attacks. So that aspect of the thing has to be taken care of. But we're at a really exciting time where we are heading towards the concept of smart hospital. So, and digital health is booming at this time, post-COVID. So, it's a really exciting time to be in this field. And I'm looking forward to see what this field has to offer.
Current questionnaires measuring mental health in the general public mainly focus on measuring mental ill health, such as anxiety, depression, and stress. They often overlook measures of mental well-being. This is like working on a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces. We are on a quest to identify the missing pieces of this puzzle, recognizing both mental ill health and well-being. This more holistic approach will enable us to develop a digital self-report survey of mental health that can be integrated into the existing health stations of our industrial partner, Sisu Health. To identify the missing pieces of this puzzle, we first collect existing questions that measure mental health and well-being. Then we optimize them and examine common patterns that emerge. We hope the final result is a self-serve survey that the public will enjoy, generating a self-monitoring tool that we'll want to use repeatedly. So far, we have developed a prototype tool that captures meaningful facets of overall mental health in the general public. The research is continuing to refine this tool.
My name is Zhao. In my previous career, I was a software developer working in Melbourne for more than 10 years. So I'm currently in a career transitioning from IT to psychology and mental health. So I came across this amazing opportunity with the DHCRC, Digital Health CRC program, where I can combine, I guess, my previous skill sets in IT and also look into an area such as a mental health, an area that I'm currently quite passionate about. So that's where how I sort of engage in this program. So what my research about, I guess, is to develop a digital self-report mental health survey for our industrial partner. So I'm not sure whether you come across, I think my industry partner called Sisu Health, they have quite a number of health stations all around Australia, especially in Priceline. What this project is about is to develop a mental health survey in a digital format on their station so that can be used by the general public in Australia.
Yeah, got it. I think I've seen those health stations. It's kind of like tell me about the health stations.
The industrial partner, Sisu Health, probably can tell you more about it. But in the gist, I guess currently they are measuring your physical health indicators such as the blood pressure. So when you got onto a station, it just requires 4 minutes of your time. So you measure your blood pressure, measuring your weight, BMI, and then from there they can recommend certain health recommendations and see how you're going. And it only takes 4 minutes of your time. So, if you go into Priceline, trying to purchase something from Priceline or pharmacies, then, you can just hop on the station and try it out.
Waiting for your script. Yeah, you got that kind of stuff. Yeah, cool. And that's interesting. So then incorporating mental health.
Yeah, that's right. So at the moment, they are measuring stress at the moment, just stress, but they would like mental health instruments that are more broad.
Yes.
That's where my project comes about.
Speaking of broad, and mental health, there's a lot to unpack there in terms of what we're talking about here in mental health. Can we go into a bit more specific?
Yeah, I think don't get me started on this mental health thing.
Right. We're going to get you started. Let's do this.
Because when I started my PhD, I think this is one of the, questions that I'm asking. What is the mental health of the general public looks like? Right. Because according to the latest National Survey of Mental Health and Wellbeing, I think it's between 2020 to 2021. So roughly about 20% of Australians have diagnosis of mental disorders, but there are 80% of Australians are either at risk or not mentally ill. My question is, what about how is their mental health of this 80% looks like? So are they, enjoying their life, or how do I quantify this mental health? So that led me down to, a quest to look into what exactly the research out there about mental health. And surprisingly, what I found about the definition of mental health is quite different from the general perception of mental health, which is usually has a negative connotations, like directly related to mental illness, or in some way or form referring to the mental health support services, which is not what I thought it was. So in literature, in research, the researcher defined mental health as more broader. It's not directly related to mental illness as such, but more like how you live your life in a positive way, can be functioning in a more positive way, more related to mental well-being rather than mental illness.
Yeah. So if I understood correctly, then, there's 80% of people there's a large majority of people, like 80% of people, who don't necessarily have a diagnosis for a mental illness necessarily.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
But that's still a large amount of people. So by definition, there's a large amount of people there. That doesn't just give everyone a green tick and say you're good.
That's right. And I think you just highlighted one very important concept, that a lot of time we view this like a bipolar type of concept, where without mental illness, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are mentally healthy.
Right.
Because this is not just one dimension. In fact, there are multiple dimensions which related back to this project, where we are trying to tease out what exactly are the major components that are meaningful to someone in Australia about their mental health.
Interesting. And so there's a role for technology to play in it?
Yeah, definitely. Our Digital Health, as I introduced earlier, they have all these health stations all around Australia. Obviously, this is one of the digital product and platform that we can, I guess, harness. So normally when we think about a survey, people think about a lot of questions to answer. Have to answer how you feel, 10 or 20 questions. And furthermore, our project are looking at broader than just mental illness. So one side effect is there'll be a lot more questions, instead of just 10 questions. So how do we kind of provide a better experience for the general public? So we are going to harness this technology and the industrial partner platform so that we could potentially make the questions items more dynamic, so we don't have to serve up like 20 questions all the time. So we can make it such that it is, depends on how you answer in the first 2 questions, then we can tailor the questions in the third or fourth and potentially shorter than 20 questions. So yeah, this is sort of our vision.
A bit more complex than which smiley face looks like you right now. No, so that kind of thing. Right? But that's a really exciting potential there because, one challenge that I imagine many technology providers might face, or anyone trying to tackle this issue of mental health of the population. You've got to reach that population. And I guess if there are already an existing group of these health stations out there that are in the general public, you've got this potential to at least capture the data and assist and present this survey to the public, then that hopefully then will give you an opportunity to have some meaningful impact.
Yeah, definitely, Pete. I think having an industrial partner collaborating in this project makes, I guess, whatever I find out in our research more, if you like, use the word, I'll translate to the practical impact to people's health. And not just that, I think because our industrial partner platform, the health station, has quite a wide reach, as you say. So we can just, I guess, just harness this capability to deliver impact, I hope.
Yeah. For more content and community about technology and healthcare, visit talkinghealthtech.com.